That's a shame, right? I'll have to tell you. I'll have to tell you what they told me to do with my class at Utah State. That's,
So
What did they tell you?
to make sure they can track every student every time. On the second week, the kids have to sign in. They have to choose seats, so they will not leave again. It's assigned seating that they do, and they have to record it in on the master plan for Utah State. I don't have to do it. They have to do it.
I'll have some fun. My grandson was in the class you taught the other day up
Better
at
Utah.
Connections at
Provides
USU.
for a better Utah.
And he said, I didn't dare talk to Rob Bishop, tell him whether I was your grandson or not. I didn't know whether you liked it or not. Nobody likes me, Daniel. Take a chance.
He's a freshman.
I didn't even read it.
No, Actually, he had his freshman year, went on a mission for 2 years.
I guess that, yeah.
So he's
you got it, Joey?
So do they give you time?
So he was
off,
there
or
then,
you-
the
usually
Aggie Blue, I
vacation
thought they would
time
do
to do
freshman
this.
orientation.
he's counted as somebody in school because he's been gone for 2 years.
Uh,
He was there scouting up.
all the work I'm doing here is actually supposed to be
They
pay
should have
off
said
there.
something. I had a lot of
Because
others that came up and said, do you
Thanks to
know?
me. Good.
Yes.
I was afraid you were having to.
I understand that's a game you'll find in Utah. Just because
About
you're
that.
from New York. Well, you know my house.
That makes perfect sense. This is all gonna pay
I was
off.
connected.
Yes, sir. I told Judge Thorne,
Maybe I'm new.
I was in court. I had been out of law school too long. And there was a case going on involving Utah State and stock market about an investment fee, millions of dollars, right? There were 17 lawyers there in the courtroom. Judge Christophers had heard the case, got all through. He said, and he gave a very thoughtful decision. He says, what makes me feel so good is I know this is not the final decision. You're going to appeal, no matter what I decide to appeal. I feel like same thing, no matter what we do here. It's not gonna be the final decision.
Yeah, I can remember actually inviting the lawyer to appeal.
Yes.
Saying, I think this is what it is,
You
but
guys have present.
Good luck.
All right, commissioners, we are live and ready to go.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody out to our meeting today. We're hoping that Commissioner Durham will be able to join us. She's come down with a stomach bug. So if she doesn't make it, we'll understand why. And the rest of you, thank you for all the work that you've been doing mapping this last week. It has, I know, been an interesting experience so far. So our first item of business on the agenda is the approval of our minutes from the August 3rd meeting. Does anybody have any changes that they'd like to see in the minutes? Not hearing any, can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Not hearing any, I'll call the motion. All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is actually legal discussion, but Matt let us know that he would be a few minutes late. And so we'll skip that. And we'll move to a discussion of the mapping process to Gordon.
So this meeting is going to be all about mapping process. What I'd like to do is Cassidy has been working on kind of just looking at different metrics on the maps. And so I'm going to have her present. We're only going to be talking about the congressional maps, because that's really all we have had time for. And we need really, 10 or 12 maps of each group to really be able to show you some things. So the more the better, but I'm going to turn the time over to Cassidy. She's going to hand you some papers and kind of talk about them for a minute.
Okay. So what I'm going to hand to you is a collection of congressional maps that you made as teams. Now, you may not have a least favorite intern yet, but I can guarantee it's going to be me by the time I'm done presenting to you. Nobody likes criticism, I know. But here's kind of what you have been up to as teams, because I'm sure you know kind of what maps you've created, but maybe aren't as familiar with what has been done by your fellow teams. So basically what I did is I took these maps and I looked at a couple of different metrics that I think will be helpful in creating maps in the future. So the first thing I looked at was compactness of districts. You hear that all the time. They must be compact. And I think there's lots of ways we can look at maps and think, okay, yeah, that's not a compact district. But we all have weird county shapes. States across the United States have weird shapes. So measuring compactness isn't quite as like cut and dry as you think it would be. Joey, if you could turn to the next slide. So there's two ways that I've been looking at, and they're pretty popular throughout all the states, Polsey-Popper and RIAC. And what you need to know that's most important is it's based on circles, because circles are the most compact shape we have, right? So the first one takes the area of the district, and then it's a ratio to the circle that has the same circumference of the district perimeter. So it's kind of that ratio of like, what's the size difference? And the RIAC one is like, okay, what's the smallest circle I can draw around this shape? And it compares it that way. So most states use both of these and kind of look at it. 1 would be like a perfect circle. 0 means you did not so great of a job. However, with compactness, it's important to know you can cheat these scores. So for example, if this like hypothetical district was in the shape of a snake, they actually can get really high compactness scores, because even if it's all snake-like, it's really easy to draw a small circle around it, right? So just keep in mind, I'm not telling you that I'm like, yes, I want to see a 1 district, because it's just not possible in our state, or probably in most states. So what I did is I was like, okay, let's look at the average. So we have these maps that you've created, and I said, okay, what's the average compactness score? What's this, and this, just so we kind of have an idea of like what we can achieve. And for some of the scores, I compared them to the last congressional district map, because I think what we would want to do is at least do the same or better, right? I think that's like a good goal. And then we know legally, like we're probably going to be okay with compactness. So Joy, if you can hit the next slide. These are the compactness scores of all of your different maps. So the black square is our map we currently have right now, the one that they voted for and put into effect in 2010. And these are all the other different maps. If you can go ahead and click to the next slide. So if you look at this top one, we have one map that did not score at least the same or better for the Polsey-Popper. And then if you go to the next one, we have another map that didn't quite cut it. Oh, maybe it did cut it. There was another one that didn't cut it. Anyways, so in terms of that, oh, it looks like that one is good. Never mind, struggle today. We just want to make sure that we're at least like around our average for those scores. And so as you're drawing maps, think like, okay, what's the smallest circle that can be drawn around this map? And obviously, for example, map 1, we have this big southern district. Even though it's big in size, the circle that you could draw around it relative to the area is still pretty good in terms of score. Okay, for our next thing we looked at is I did how many counties did we split up in the districts? So 6 splits is what we have with the 2010 map. And then this is kind of where you were in terms of how many different counties had multiple congressional districts in them. So there's a pretty strong average at 5. So that's around where we'd expect to be, is about 5 or 6 counties split by the different congressional districts would probably be like a good metric to sit at. Then I also looked at the number of city splits. The reason why the congressional map that we have currently is kind of in between is because there's been so much like annexation in different areas around the state. It's hard to look at where cities currently are and say, oh, they split this city. It's like, well, maybe, but maybe that used to be farmland and was now annexed into a city. So I'd say anywhere from like 9 to 11 cities were split. And as you can see, there's a little bit more variety in whether or not we split a city as we currently understand them. Obviously, people may not officially belong to a city, but they might still feel part of that city. So as we continue to get more communities of interest maps, I think that will help us kind of learn how to do this.
So you had 2 maps that only split 2 cities?
Well, no, it was the second map of the purple team.
Yeah. So these are all labeled according to the map. So if you look in the corner, like this is map 1, which had 3 cities split. And so we're averaging more around like 7 or 8 splits. If you like combine all of your maps together. Okay, next slide. Something I think we should avoid doing is putting 3 districts into 1 city. We had a couple of those throughout the mapping process, especially some of these smaller cities. Like, it's kind of weird to have Mill Creek have 3 congressional districts in their city. So in the current map, the 2010 map, if a city is split, it usually has 2 congressional districts that are splitting it up, right? Some of the maps had 3. And when I say this, I know these maps are living, right? They can change. So if you're like, wow, you know what? I really liked my team's map. I don't want to say it's easy to fix these things, but we can still fix these things, right? So as you look as a team back at your congressional maps, it might be beneficial to go through and think, okay, is this city split up 2 times? Is it split up 3 times? Our current map doesn't have any 3 splits, so it's probably a good idea to only let cities be split by 2 congressional districts, if that makes sense. So what this is showing you is these are the plans where at least like 1 city has 3 splits, and I've included the cities. Plans with 2 cities, and then we had 1 map that had 3 cities. Joey, if you could go to the next slide.
Have you measured that with comparing it to how many split counties then?
So
If you're trying to not split counties.
it's a balance, right? So if, for example, if a county is split, it usually has, I didn't look to see how many times it was split because I just expected Salt Lake to be split like multiple times, or like Utah or Davis, right? And have multiple districts.
To be split twice.
Right, it just has to be. So what this is more looking at is like city boundaries. I didn't compare like, okay, this one has this many counties and this is how many cities, but I can look at that after and tell you.
Just curious.
Just curious at what the balance is. Yeah. Okay, and then I think I have one more. Oh, yes, I do have. Go ahead to the next slide. These were our population deviations for the different maps. I know that Green Team had a map that was in like 3 or 1 people, but when it got transferred over to a different program, I think one of the blocks missed. So it was showing like a positive like 40 individuals and like negative 44. And also we got a notification from Esri that they were fixing some of our data. So we haven't looked to see like how much that's affected your population deviations. But this is kind of what I saw as I went through the maps and like determined kind of like, okay, what's our average population deviation? And we're definitely staying well within the 1%. So Joey, if you go ahead and click to the next slide. These are all the percentages. And when you look at this table, like this doesn't mean 16%. I went ahead and because the numbers we're working with are so small. If there was a 1 here, this is 1%. So all of them pass in terms of being within our standard deviation. Some of you were like, yeah, I'm gonna really use my deviation. And then others of you kept it pretty small, but even then it would have to be above a 0.5 for it to be not within the 1%. So you're still on a lower end, maybe not like 1% difference, but you're staying well within what you're allotted. And then my final slide, I kind of just took and put some of the information we had together. So for population deviation, because we've kind of taken a more liberal approach and not like been within 1 or 3 people, which I think is what the current house map was back in 2010, I said, sweet, we all pass. Those maps all look great in that area. In terms of city splits, I said, okay, you're either like about average or like you're really close to being average, or I'm like, ooh, you're above average on that. And then does not split a city into 3 districts. And then compactness, it looks like 5 actually was, that's my bad. And then in terms of county splits, were we above what the legislature had last time or below? But you know, once again, a lot of these measurements are really subjective in terms of like what you as a commission want to prioritize, right? So if you really care about your population deviation being like 1 or 2 people, that might mean we have to go higher on city splits, right? Or we have to go higher on county splits. So this was just kind of a way to look at what you've done and look at averages and kind of think, okay, what as we as a team can kind of put together and expect versus like, I guess, going by a criteria that other people have established. Because once again, I think it's more about what geographical challenges you have in your own state that you're dealing with and what you're prioritizing, more than it is like getting perfect scores on something like compactness and things like that. And then as we get further along with our map process, there's several entities that will be scoring our maps. And they'll use tests that are similar to this. They'll look at how many times you split the county. They'll look at compactness. Of course, they'll also look at political data, which we're not doing, but it'll be out there. So I'm sure you'll have people coming in and saying like, you did this, this, and this, and you're like, okay, but we weren't looking at political data. So just keep that in mind. I guess like the whole point of this presentation was to kind of give you an idea of where you're at and what people might come with in terms of grievances about your current maps.
Are these all the maps?
Those are all of your maps.
Just ours is not in here.
Just the congressional maps.
I know, ours is not in here.
I didn't see
Are
it
your
either.
green ones not in here?
No.
It's so bad, they threw it away.
I just threw them out.
Yeah, our deviation was one.
We're gonna print it for you.
Oh, yeah, we don't have any green ones.
Well, there's at least 2 out there, so don't worry. Yes.
There are.
Now you raise that issue, and I was
Two
the one
green
that I principally put together.
You only have
And
one?
I can see the county splits, the city splits. I can probably go back and adjust that. I wasn't really focusing on that. I was just trying to do.
We were focusing on numbers.
Yeah. So I think, so if you said, well, we're interested, but you have this problem, I don't think it'd take very hard for us to go back and readjust those.
Yeah, and that's what I want you to say, right? I want you to look at this and say, oh, you know, I still really like this map and I can go and make it better and fix it. Because honestly, whatever you take to the different public hearings across the state, you're going to hear feedback, right? So I think as long as you're willing to take the feedback and like improve and change your maps, you still can use your maps. I'm not telling you like, nope, time to throw out this map. It's not worth it anymore. We're done. So this is just to give you an idea of like, okay, here's our things I can look for as I'm mapping. And some of these criteria will change, right? So as we go into House and Senate, the number of city splits you're gonna have is gonna like increase exponentially, right? Because suddenly you're doing, for House, you're 75 districts, right? So, but even as you're going in and mapping this week, you can be thinking like, okay, like what cities am I going to have to split versus cities that like probably should exist entirely within a district if I can. It's a hard balance. So don't worry, I'm not looking at any of your maps and thinking like, those are terrible. So it's okay. They're all fixable. They're all changeable. Nothing is static yet. Any other questions?
Thank you for looking at this. Please, Jeff.
Oh, just a comment. I like how simple your presentation is. It's very easy to understand and gather information that we can put back into our future efforts. I like it. So keep up the good work.
Good. Is there anything else you want to know about your maps that I can maybe find for you? Something I'm interested at looking at in the future too is comparing, we have talking about like keeping cores of prior districts, right? So as soon as we get our Esri launched, I think something that might be interesting to see is like geographically, what percentage of that district is still in its same district? Would that be something you're interested in? Or would you rather not know?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the law.
Yeah, I think that would be one of the things that would be nice to look. I mean, that's one of the criteria we have and that we're trying to balance across these other things. And so if we have information about it, that would be helpful.
Okay, I'll go ahead and do that because right now, I'm not sure how they're gonna measure it, to be honest, right? Like, it's easy to eyeball something and say, oh yeah, like most of that district is now in a district that's similar, but I'll look into that and try and find a good measurement for you, if that's helpful.
Especially with the population shifts. I mean, it's grown a lot here, so you have to
Yeah.
expand out. When you
It has to
expand
be,
out, then you
yeah.
push other districts.
Yep. So I think like some districts are gonna perform a lot better with that criterion, right? So everything in the south is probably gonna stay in a very similar district, right? But when you get into Salt Lake, that will be interesting in Utah County. So that's where the averages really help when you're making multiple maps, right? Because it's hard to say, well, I don't know what number is appropriate if I don't have several maps to compare to each other that we've drawn with the new populations, right? Like you can take the old map and it's good to know the difference, but how do you know if that's a really big number or a really small number until someone draws a better map than yours, right? So it's really helpful to have multiple maps, even if they're not quite perfect, because then at least you can get an idea of an average and work from there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you very much. Gordon?
Yeah, so I wanted to have that little discussion first, so that when we go into the discussion of setting our criteria, you have seen how these points are interactive. There's not just, oh, this is the one criteria we have to have. It's, well, of course, the numbers and the number of districts, but these other criteria have a little bit of a give and play to them. So one of the things that we need to do, I'm going to turn some time over to Matt, is about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we gave you the criteria. We've published on the website. I have one public comment that wants to be read. I want to give you before we start the discussion. And then I'll let Matt kind of talk about it. And what I'd like to do is have you take an action on the criteria. So let me just read this one comment and I'll turn it over to Matt. This fogs up my glasses. So this is from, okay, the Utah Redistricting Coalition stands in support of the Independent Redistricting Commission mapping standards. We believe that these standards will result in better maps that fairly balance the needs of communities and the people who live in them. These map standards will act as guardrails for the commission to produce maps that result in representing what reflects the will of the people. However, we do not share the Commissioner Durham's concern about the core of prior districts mapping standards. Not only does the standard have the potential of providing protection for incumbents, but also assumes that the last districting process created fair district boundaries and actually accurately represents communities of interest. The Utah Redistricting Coalition understands that the map making process is challenging and result in sacrifices needed to be made on one side or the other. That being said, as community members and advocates from around the state, we implore the Independent Redistricting Commission to prioritize communities of interest and are confident that when balanced with other standards, the commission will come up with the best maps possible. And we will work to help people engage with this commission. And we hope that at the end of the process, the legislature and the Governor Cox will put the well-being of the state ahead of political ambition by by adopting the fair maps that are drawn by the commission. Okay, Matt, you're on.
Right, thanks, Gordon. So what I'm handing you is a proposed final threshold criteria and redistricting standards. So this just comprises the tables that were in our proposed standards that were posted and circulated. There are just 2 proposed changes that we've seen and have incorporated into the attached. So other than these 2, everything else remains the same as presented in the initial proposed standards. So, and this population deviation stems from conversations and communications I've had with legislative research in trying to make sure that our population deviation is aligned with what the legislative committee is doing with their maps, obviously wanting to comply with any of the districting principles of the committee. And the only change here, and I thought we would try to clarify in our criterion, is the overall range that we've discussed of the way that they've used their terms has been a little different. And I think we finally figured out what their standards are. And based on our meeting last time where we talked about some of these terms where you have the total deviation, the maximum deviation. So we talked about that 10% and where that could be. In short, what the legislature has adopted, the committee, is that deviation of 10% overall deviation for the state and the Senate is 10%, but it's tethered to the ideal population. And you'll remember the ideal population is the number, if it's equally divided, So either by 4 or 25 or 79, whichever districts we're doing, the total population of Utah, we get that ideal population, that if they were all the same. And what the legislature has agreed to do is with the congressional districts, they can go 0.1 above and they can go 0.1 below. So that would be then an overall deviation or maximum deviation of 0.2%. But that 0.2% is locked around
It's the high and the low.
It's the high and the low are locked. It can't shift. So the question that I think we've been grappling with over the weeks is, let's say we had an even population of all house districts, but one was 9.6% below the ideal number. Now, that would still be within the general definition in our statute for you, for the commission to say, hey, it needs to be 10% and overall the lowest and the highest. But that wouldn't qualify under the legislature because it would be outside of the 5% that they've now pegged as a deviation. And so I think we've probably seen what the legislature has produced, and if not, I can get you copies. I think it would make sense for us to put a similar table together that has the exact numbers. So you're sitting down, now that we know what the numbers are, we can tell you exactly what 5% above it is and 5% below, and give you real-time numbers so that will be accessible to you. And so the change that we've proposed here is the one in the red highlighting will be removed. And so what we've added is, starting with that fourth sentence, for congressional districts, and this is on the population deviation, the total population deviation, then add the language also known as overall range or maximum deviation, and these are terms that the courts and others have used, shall not exceed 0.2%, with the deviation from the ideal population not exceeding 0.1% for any district. So it just clarifies that, okay, this plus or minus 0.1 that the legislature has done is both above and below the ideal population. And so this gives us a little more flexibility than perhaps we were working with before. If it was a 0.1% total deviation, it's a 0.2% that we're now adhering to. Now, with respect to the State House, State Senate, and State School Board, we've modified that line to read, and for those entities, the total population deviation shall not exceed, and removing the plus or minus 5%, but it'll be 10%, with the deviation from the ideal population not exceeding 5% for any district. Now, we've removed this line that we had because the total population deviation is defined in our statute that creates this commission, does not account or tether it to the ideal population. All it does is say, hey, 10% from the lowest to the highest, but doesn't say it needs to be, you know, in the middle there, that the ideal needs to land in the middle. And so, you know, we are gravitating a little bit from what we would be allowed to do under the statute. But as we've discussed in the past, it only makes sense to produce maps that would be aligned and adhere to what the legislature's doing. So it seems to make sense only to supply maps that would fit their criteria as well. Any questions on the population deviation?
Didn't you give us a paper one time that said what each percentage was and what the dollar and then what the number figure would be?
Yes.
Okay, I'm still trying to find that again.
It's right up on the screen.
Well, and this is going to be just modified slightly. So, and I think what we're going to do.
Yeah, it's the one that we got from Joey when we started mapping.
Yeah, we'll give you that again.
And that I don't know if that one had the exact deviations, but we'll work together that come Monday. You'll have a similar form to this, what's up there. But instead of just saying, okay, you can go up 817, we'll give you the exact number so you can know and see exactly, okay, this many people above and this many people below for every district that you're working on. If that would be most helpful. It sounds, that's the feedback I think I'm getting. And I think that we just need to confirm that it's the numbers based on what we understand now these deviations to be. So
We'll forward it to them and have them review it and send it back out.
that'd be great. So that should be good to go on Monday. The other change, and this one comes from Professor Personally as we were reviewing, and this is more a technical change, but I think it makes it more consistent with the legal obligations under the Voting Rights Act. And what the clarification here is, so you see we'll remove that initial line that's been highlighted in red and add the following language. The commission will comply with the United States Constitution and all applicable federal and state laws. The second sentence, the commission will comply with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, but will not otherwise use race as a predominant factor in drawing district lines. And the reason for this change, initially we had written the commission will not use race as a predominant factor. Sometimes under the Voting Rights Act, you're required to use that depending on what the demographics. And I don't think we're going to have to cross that bridge. So we don't need to necessarily get into that conversation now. But this is now more consistent with the Voting Rights Act and expertise of Professor Personally. Is that we just want to make sure. I know the plan is not to use race as a predominant factor in drawing district lines, but you can't say that you will never use that because under certain circumstances, the Voting Rights Act requires you to use race. We don't think that based on the information we've seen thus far, that will be a case, but we just wanted to make that clarification. Any questions on that second revision? And otherwise, what you have before you is what has been discussed and analyzed. We've already revised it a number of times. Obviously have received some good feedback. We just heard today some feedback with respect to cores of prior districts, and I may just speak to that very briefly. These are express requirements for this commission to review. And so the fact that there's a standard addressing cores of prior districts is because you are required to do that under the law. And so what we've done is essentially just put the language of what that requirement is. Now, I think I understand that comment to be not necessarily, hey, completely remove it, but the suggestion was where appropriate. Well, it could have been completely remove it. And if so, we can't do that. I'm just telling you that you can't take that out. That needs to be in there. That's part of the law. But insofar as they're saying, hey, if there's some sort of tension or friction as to communities of interest and cores of prior district, I understood that to maybe be they're suggesting you err on the side of communities of interest or weight that higher. So, and I won't comment on that other than to say we have to have this standard. How you guys use and utilize and weigh it against others is obviously something that we'll be working with for the next couple months. But otherwise, I think these are in a position where we can adopt them. We will modify the one-page sheet that you've been using to make sure all the numbers are correct, but really it'll just be minimal changes to those bullet points below. And hopefully that's been helpful. We obviously can provide you with anything that you find to be helpful during the actual map drawing. I don't know if this one page meets that, or if you want to see something else, just let us know. But from a legal standpoint, I believe now we're in a good position where you've now adopted standards and criteria, which you're required to do under the Act, and that these standards and criteria are consistent with federal and state law and should serve as a nice guidepost going forward. Questions?
And I have a question.
Yes, sir.
You know, as we're drawing our lines, as a practical matter, I know that if we were to take, say, the 75 house districts and totally change them all around, you know, that seems to be the request that we do that. There's not a snowball's chance it's ever going to pass the House of Representatives. I mean, those 75 people have to vote on what we present. And I'm sure they could easily say, well, that may be one way to do it. Here's our way of doing it, that we protect the core interest. So and besides having the time to do something that enormously large and try to get it figured, what's your advice on that? Could we consider the practicalities of doing political things that we know that if we change it so dramatically, it's never going to pass the legislature?
That's a great question, and obviously something that is a practical issue. And my, I guess, initial response to that would be, you can consider anything that, as long as you're following these criteria and standards that you are required to and you're adopting. And to me, that would also include, say, cores of prior districts saying, look, no, we need to understand and do those. And what Cassidy has now shown you, and what Professor Persley will discuss with us next week, and give you the ability to say, okay, how can we address that in a way that remains legal under the Constitution, that follows these criteria and principles, but is also from a practical standpoint something that could be palatable to the legislature. Because you're exactly right. If you come up with something that at the minimum falls outside of their criteria, that's going to be axed immediately. But it even goes beyond that, as you've kind of acknowledged this practical standpoint of, okay, it checks all the boxes, but you've combined 30 house districts, or they're drawing them around boundaries where there's 2 house people now in the same district. And that obviously, they would take issue with that. Now, I think what we're hearing from some of the public is, well, if that creates the best map, and if that preserves the best communities of interest, there's an argument to say maybe that should be at least considered and maybe modified if we feel like it scores well in all the other things. And so I hesitate to get into kind of the practical or the policies, other than to say, I think under the legal requirements, there's a lot of things you can consider, including those type of issues. And where you need to be careful is if you attempt to consider anything that these say we won't consider, or that we've agreed not to look at. And I'm sorry to respond so long, but this is an important aspect. And I've had some conversations with Professor Persley just this last week saying, we're in a strange position where you have limited information on both sides, and that's deliberate. And he's like, you have this every time, and it's a real challenge, but that's how it works. That your staff will be able to see and do some other things, and some other objective parties, even Professor Persley can look at things and then come back and tell you, especially if you have that question of, well, how does this impact, the prior districts or some of those other things that then can inform your decisions going forward. And finding that balance to make sure that we're, as a commission, only looking to those things that you're authorized and legally able to do, but also recognizing, hey, we want to produce a credible map. And so it doesn't make sense to us to do one in theory if it has no chance, in your view whatsoever, of ever getting any traction at all with the legislature, is what I understand your concern to be. And I think it's a very valid concern. And so what we'll try to do over these 2 months as we're working with these maps is continue to use Cassidy and Professor Persley and the other staff to help identify any of those trouble areas, whether it's, on district lines or partisan issues, but keeping you kind of sterile and able to do what you can do without tainting some of that analysis. And it's a difficult dance, and it's one that it's obviously new to me. It's new to you. Fortunately, Professor Persley has done this dance many times with other commissions, so I think he's going to be a nice resource. And I'd invite you to ask him those exact questions when he's here on Monday and Tuesday next week to say, hey, Nate, how do you do this? How have you done this in the past? And what makes sense?
This is probably more a practical question. You just have to experience it. If the legislative committee says we're going to go 0.05, and we say, no, the law allows us to go 0.10, 1.0, or 10% versus 5%. It would seem to me that even though we may technically comply with the law and do this, if we're doing something different in the legislature, that becomes a really good way for them to say, well, that's all fine and good. We want to be better than good. And so therefore, we're going to go with maps that really do it closer to one man per one vote than you're taking the extreme. That's probably a practical question. None of us are going to know until we do it.
Well, and that's a great point, and that is really the reason why we've adopted these principles to be completely aligned with what the legislature. Now, where it gets tricky is you have additional standards that you have to follow that the legislature doesn't have to follow. And that's where, you know, it is what it is. You're going to have to at least consider or determine how much to weight that and look at those issues, and we'll give you grades as to, okay, how well does it score with respect to some of these other criteria that the legislature may not care about. And so that's kind of the challenge. But at a minimum, what we presented and what is now before you, everything you have here, at least if you follow this, would not disqualify under the legislative committee's criteria. And so I think that's our floor, to make sure whatever we do doesn't get immediately disregarded because it falls outside of what they've agreed to do.
Commissioner Bishop?
Well, yes, first of all, I can go along with everything you've got here because the language in all these areas is to the extent practical. Well, we will do what is to the extent practical. And I think as we look at all these things, whether it be communities of interest or core boundaries or anything else, we will do what is to the extent practical. I'm also going to say I like the fact that you've given us much more flexibility on the population deviations, but I'm not necessarily worried about the legislature. I'm also worried about potential lawsuits. And that's why I've been such a stickler in our committee on trying to get those congressional districts down to one person. If you have one person, you will not invite litigation against the map. If we have 817, damn well there will be a lawsuit on the first day it's adopted. So this is the parameters we have. We can go under these, and we ought to. I still get queasy having school board sizes up to 10,000 off. I want us to be tighter than that. And this one is the litigational point right here. If we have our numbers very tight so that each district is equal in population, the ability of withstanding any kind of lawsuit is greatly enhanced and actually probably mitigated. And if we do the other things to extent practical, and we explain why it's practical, then that's okay as well. But I want to say what you've written gives us flexibility. It's right. I suggest we all go ahead and adopt it. But I want to also push in why that population deviation is, to me, most essential.
And where we need to keep that as low as possible.
Yes, it has to be the lower the better. And this has to be the maximum we can screw around with. But we hit up to these and we will have a map that's non-defensible to anybody, not just the legislature.
So I want to ask a question, and I don't know if you recall, but one of the things at the NCSL conference they talked about was this deviation, and they were still talking to staying within the boundaries, but I believe they said that if we have a good argument on a criteria that causes us to be at, say, 200 versus 50, that we could make that argument. Now, I don't necessarily disagree that it doesn't open it up to litigation, but I thought I heard that the courts were amenable to that.
Oh, certainly. And I'll just 3 points on that. The first, to respond immediately to that, is absolutely the courts recognize, and that's why there is a 1% for congressional. Now, what you're operating under is already 80% tighter than what the Supreme Court has already said is appropriate. And so that should be something that you should keep in mind as well, in my opinion, is by adopting a 0.2% deviation, you have now 80% limited yourself even more, 80%. And this is because the legislature's done that. And I think a part of it is a fear of litigation, because that's where you see the litigation is hey, I can draw a map that meets all of your criteria, keeps all your communities together that you've identified, but I can do it with less of a deviation. That's where you get in trouble. Now, what happens though is, on the flip side of that coin is, well, you can always get it down to 1, but if you're splitting a community of interest in the middle in that situation, and doing it just to get to 1, you know, to deviate by 0.1% to keep a community intact, in my opinion, would not be subject to any successful litigation to say, oh, wow, you could have done it more if you would have cut this community in half. So a few points to that. The first is the legislature and now this commission has adopted, at least with congressional, a very small deviation relative to what the Supreme Court says is already acceptable. Now, so I think that's one point to keep in mind. Now, with respect to the 10%, that's how far the Supreme Court has gone in all those other districts to say, hey, we've approved deviations that do get up to that point. And I think that then comes down to that analysis that Commissioner Bishop and others have said. If you can draw a map with a shorter deviation while to the extent practicable in addressing those things, then that should obviously be the goal. And that's where you could be subject to criticism, is you're not justified in having those deviations. Now, I think the reality is, and based on the conversation with the professor personally, is, well, the reason there will be deviations is because some of these other factors that you say, hey, it makes sense in this case, we're still well within, and in fact, well under any deviation that would be problematic, but it makes sense to go over by a few hundred or a few thousand in a certain situation for a community of interest, or for compactness, or keeping a city together, or keeping any other county or other lines, or any of the criteria that you feel are important. And so I think what everybody's saying is right. and it's this dance and this delicate thing, but there is a practical concern of, well, the litigation generally comes down to that population deviation. And so the farther you get away from the deviations from the ideal, the more justification I think will be expected to see. But with that said, we're not even going to get too far, at least with the congressional, such that would necessarily be a large issue, at least I think from the court standpoint. Now, I think the legislature and others might take a different view. They certainly do this, but part of the reasoning too of this flexibility in the 1% is we're dealing with numbers from 2020 that are our best guess of what the population is. So to suggest, and I think the courts recognize this, that if you got down to 1 person, the practical reality is it's not 1 person difference in these 4. I mean, even with the movement that's happened now. And so I think, you know, that can be a trap sometimes from what I've seen and read of people saying, oh, we have to get it down to this 1. And I think that's why courts say, well, no, we just want it reasonable, and they need to be reasonably the same.
But Matt, I hear Commissioner Bishop's point a little bit different, in that if you have the numbers small, you prevent the litigation as opposed to winning the litigation.
Well, and I guess that's a question of.
Am I misstating you, or is
No,
that?
and I'm sorry, that's not a question of possibility. That's a question of historical reality of what we've had over the last 30, 50 years. I'm sorry, that's exactly the point. If that number is low, it doesn't have to be 1, but if that number is, but you better have a damn good reason why it's higher than 1. And that's, I think, what you're trying to say. And we better have a damn good reason if it's higher than that. And if we come up with numbers these high, then we are putting something that is irrational, and the legislature ought to reject it. So you've given us the parameter. Adopt this. You've given us the parameter. We don't have to go to the edge of that parameter. And if we do, we are on shaky ground if we come close to this parameter.
And
Now, wait, I'm sorry. What I'm saying is I'm ready to vote for your language right now. Don't talk me out of it.
It sounds like you might even want to go. No, your points are well taken, Commissioner Bishop. And where I would just address the shaky ground issue on those parameters is the shaky ground, I think, is where you start pushing the outskirts of the 1%, like if you're 0.9 or you're 0.8. I think the legislature recognizing your exact issue and historically saying, well, wait a minute, let's not even get into that shaky ground. Let's not get into these lean limbs. Let's stick with the trunk of the deviation of 0.2% as opposed to a full 1% where you might start getting shaky. I just have not seen a case or don't have the concern, I guess, from a legal standpoint, just advising you, that even if you were on the outer edges of what this 0.2%, that would necessarily create any legal problem. Certainly not something that could prevail in court, in my opinion. But you're absolutely right. Historically, that's where it comes down as you get there. The farther you get out, I just want us to understand the universe has already been shrunk based on what the criteria we've already agreed to. And so I think all those, most of those limbs have already been cut off, that we're now down to a trunk of 0.2, where the courts say, well, no, you can get up to 1%, you're fine. Well, we're not even close.
But I think, again, the idea is if you can keep it as small as possible, people are less inclined to file litigation because the chance of winning becomes so small. So if you're in litigation, all the things you're talking about are the things that would be in favor of supporting the plan. But if you can prevent people from even being tempted to litigate it because the numbers are so small, that may actually come out ahead.
Absolutely.
You want the guardrail on the hill as opposed to the ambulance in the valley, right?
Absolutely.
Got it.
Absolutely. And insofar as you can come with the ideal population, best case scenario, if you can meet your criteria and be within the exact ideal in every district, that's the goal. I mean, that's why it's called the ideal population.
I think that's what Lyle and I have been trying to do is everything is under 100 people. And our goal was to try and keep it under 50 people deviation. In the House districts and the Senate, as well as just the congressional.
Absolutely. The closer you can get to the ideal population, the better you'll be. And recognizing that there may be strong reasons why you
But you ought to make those
And
consciously rather than
make those
unconsciously.
consciously and understand. And I'm just telling you from a legal standpoint that you're allowed to do that. If you feel like you have a compelling reason to say, oh, instead of one person off, we're going to go to 10 people off or 100 people off because we don't want to split the city, you can do that and not be subject to a lawsuit. Now, someone can sue you anyways, regardless of what you do. If you're 2 people off, even if you're 1 person off, they're going to say, well, this was a crap map because you didn't, it's not compact and it has to be compact. So there's no guarantee that you're going to avoid any litigation, or whoever adopts the maps that adopted isn't going to get litigated. And I don't think that's going to necessarily obviously involve us, but.
I want to follow up on what Rob said, Commissioner Bishop, excuse me. Because I think one of the real problems you have in this area, some measurements are objective and some are subjective. The objective ones counting the bodies. And we can argue all we want about this is not right, or that. That's the figures, that's what we have to live with. We can't say, well, they missed 10 people here, whatever. So we have that's objective. When we get into community of interest, that's subjective. And I'll give you a good example. Salt Lake, I've had people from Salt Lake say, we want one district in Salt Lake because that's a community of interest. And I say, oh, really? If I go to Salt Lake School District and I have kids on the east side of the district and I have kids on the west side of the district, are they all the same community of interest? If so, I would have no trouble getting the teachers on the east side of the district to teach in the west side of the district. And what about Canyon School District splitting off from Jordan? If they're all one community of interest, why did they split up? Why are they different? And so I think when you start talking about community of interest, but back to the point, it seems impressive to me through all the years the legislature have done it. I've never been on the committee, so I can take some claim in this. We've never been sued. Never been sued. And I pick up newspapers now and they say, oh, we gerrymandered every time. Hey, if they gerrymandered in 2010, why didn't somebody sue about it? They just complain about it. Why didn't they sue? They should have sued, and then we could have known and set it all apart rather than just complain about it. I think Commissioner Bishop made the nail on the head. My understanding is when they looked at it, they said 1%, 1% deviation. There's really, you can argue all you want about community of interest, compactness. You even talk about boundaries. One of the amazing things to me is, as Commissioner Thorne and I are doing this, is the weird city boundaries. Holy cow. When you try to work things together, make it look like a compact, you've got districts all over the place. And so I think I'm going to drive as much as I can. I really appreciate Commissioner Thorne as we work together, trying to get them exactly but I think when the final push comes, then we think we need to really zero in on having that population as close as we can. Because it's going to be hard for me to justify why I didn't cut this town here, but I did cut this town over here, because they're going to be counties touched. Salt Lake County is going to have to be divided. I've had people say, put Logan all in one district. Well, you can't. Logan's too big. So Logan's going to have to be in at least 2 districts. You're going to have to divide it some way. And so why do you cut if you cut it? So all that becomes really pretty subjective. And I think key is us to do as much as we can on looking at conflicts that are community of interest doing this. But I think the ultimate, to me at least, is going to be the numerical number, because that's objective. I can count that.
And we're trying to respect city boundaries, and county lines, while we're trying to get those numbers as small as possible.
That's the ideal, and that's your task, and I think what has been presented will allow you to hopefully account for all of those things and do it in a way.
And hopefully, I see the role of the staff then being to take those other measurements laid over the top and say, what you've done does this problem. Is this something that we can fix and still stay within those numbers? And if not, then we need to make a decision. I'm hoping the staff can take those other measurements, lay it over the top and say, you got this big problem here. And at least do it with your eyes open, as opposed to just say, but it's, at least from drawing the maps themselves, it's a tough enough bargain just to try and get the numbers of the county and the city lines in place.
Sure.
But I would like to have somebody else lay it over the top and say, okay, this community you have done this to, is there an alternative available?
Right.
And like if we spend some time counting the trees, we miss the forest. That's exactly what it is.
But I think that's why it's so valuable, the kind of stuff that Cassidy, you shared with us, and will continue to be so valuable. So,
And I hope then another thing is that the staff will overlay the Hispanic population, overlay other populations, say, okay, have you done something to this? And then we get the community of interest comments. They can put that overlay on and say, what have you done with that?
Excellent. Any questions, concerns?
we've certainly had a robust conversation, and I appreciate that. But we do have a proposed set of criteria that we have before us, and I would like to be able to entertain a motion to adopt those.
I will read out.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
And a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the motion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Not hearing any, the motion carries.
May I suggest we put them on our webpage and put Matt's telephone number? This is who to call. No, I'm kidding you.
Perfect, thank you. Matt, was there any other legal issues that you wanted to raise today?
I think I just may be chiming in with Gordon here as we move on to other item discussions, but specifically Professor Pursley, our expert from California, who's done this process a number of times, is going to be here in Salt Lake Monday and Tuesday of next week, and is looking forward to sitting down with each of you to go watch you map, to answer questions, kind of analyze what's been going on, and provide his expertise, because not only is he a voting rights expert, and that's what he teaches at Stanford Law School, but he's actually drawn maps with multiple commissions. And so he will be an excellent resource, I think, for all of us to say, hey, what are we doing well? What can we do better? And any of these questions too that you have where I feel inadequate to answer them, and I apologize for that with the lack of experience, but hopefully he can answer some of those even more difficult questions of what he's seen in prior commissions and how to, on the number issues and everything else. So we'll look forward to having him next week, and he's actually going to be involved, for the coming months as we work to finalize these maps and get them into the best maps that the commission feels good about.
Thank you very much.
So on that note, what I wanted to do was get you guys, it was fun to have Cassidy criticize the commission. Now the commission needs to go back to staff and tell us, you've been doing this for a week. We are going to be doing this for about 2 months now. And what have we been doing that has worked effectively and what hasn't? And then maybe we can start changing some of our process or approach to make it better for you. So that's one of the things I wanted to do.
One of the things that I think in terms of dividing the cities, if you divide a city by one census block that has 3 people, or you divide a city in half, there ought to be a different measurement for those. Because if you have to shave a little bit off a corner of a city, that's different than splitting the city down the middle.
That makes sense.
And that's what we've been trying to do is when we have to divide a city, how can we shave it on the sides rather than split it up? So I don't know how you would measure that, but I think there's a qualitative difference there.
I think there's a way to do it. We just, go ahead.
I would think if you cut a city by only 3 people, it's going to force the county to create a precinct in that city of 3 people, which would not be good. So I would suggest carving out a bigger chunk, maybe 300 people,
Well,
to the best of your ability.
I agree. The 3 was just sort of a,
Yeah,
An
I
example.
know what you mean. I know what you mean.
but rather than cutting 10,000 out of the city, we're
Yeah.
trying to cut a couple blocks out of the city.
Yeah, and we can do that and just let the county deal with it downstream, let it be their problem, which
But in terms of the measurement, I would just
Still.
like to, somehow we can measure,
I agree. That's a good point.
we've cut no city more than 15% or something.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the measurement
So,
would
but
be.
what I'm hearing Commissioner Baker say is if we are going to carve out something, so it's reasonably sized so that they can have a
A practical size for the clerks to deal with.
Unless it gets you to one person. And then
Do it for one person precinct.
Matt?
Thank you, Chair. Just to speak to that point, that's an interesting issue that's been a topic of conversation with Professor Pursley, and he can address it in more detail next week. But I think what you've hit on is not every, X or check is created equal. You can say we only split up 2 cities, but those cities were split into 12 different house districts or something to that effect. And so he's in his experience, he does have ways of accounting for and showing that. So it's more than just a number of, carving just a small piece or a large piece. And, the Princeton group, and they have all these measurements that they look at to get deeper than just that initial number. And so I think he'll be helpful to you and all of us as we try to figure out what information you want and how you can see that and how that might be viewed by an entity that's grading our work, which will happen, and ways to avoid, doing things that could
I
be.
know I'm going to make somebody unhappy. I just.
Sure.
It's just, I want to do as good a job as I can.
Well, that's great. That's all we can do.
Simply to make as many people unhappy.
I don't know how to measure the unhappiness.
But I want to follow up on that too, because I've really appreciated working with Commissioner Horn, because I don't sense that either one of us had any political motivation in what we're doing. We're looking at numbers and areas, but I'm sure when we got through or when we finish, someone could go back and say, did you realize you put this here and that? And then we could readjust the boundaries around because we just took what it looked like. And so it's again, we're counting trees and not looking at the forest. So I wish there was some way, county clerks before, I really appreciate what Commissioner Baker said, because I just thought to myself, you know, I'm a county clerk and I have 4 different districts here that could be combined into 2, and I have to figure out my voting, my ballot, whose names go where, because it's not, I'll tell you, we had an experience in the Senate one time when somebody's name was not put on the ballot, one county he was in. It was really a close election. It really became, he won without that problem, but it was a issue of that once the ballots go out, they don't put the name on it. It's really tough.
So along that line, one of the things we're doing is we met with the state elections office. And so they're meeting with all the county clerks. And one of the things we talked to them about was reviewing our plans. Once we got plans we're ready to start having looked at, and they'll go through and look at these points that we just, so you're discussing. So we'll have some other additional oversight looking at technical aspects.
What would be valuable, Gordon, is if they could give us advice that says, not just don't do this, but if we did it this way instead of that way, the numbers would still come out the same, but it would make our life easier. I would really appreciate that kind of,
You just don't want criticism. You want some ways
I want
to.
constructive help.
Okay,
in making it
constructive
better.
help. I get it. Okay. No, we'll ask for that.
It's all right.
So you should go back to what Lyle said, and we should tell the cities to change how their maps look. So you remember that one area of Salt Lake had 400 people down here, and that narrow neck of, was it 2 people that connected it to the rest of Salt Lake City?
Yeah.
And it goes in Mill Creek? That's stupid.
Yeah.
So Salt Lake City, if you want your, draw your boundaries straight if you want them to be compact.
But there's property tax out there. There's property tax.
Or the Spanish Fork that has lots of islands in different
That's
places.
exactly why it was there. That is exactly what it was.
All right, yeah.
Okay, and on the same note, we're going to take, once you get school district maps, we're gonna be talking to the school superintendent and having her review this as well as the local school districts. So we're not gonna have the school board because they're elected, but we're gonna travel it down into their and try to get as much feedback. Again, constructive criticism as opposed to just criticism. So we'll try to get that. So we'll have comments from different organizations to help us out that I think we want their input. Is there other things that would help in the districting process? You're all doing excellent. I appreciate the hours you're putting in. I appreciate the hours you're going to put in. It's, yes.
I'm curious about the email you got from Esri, making some adjustments to the data. What was that all about?
I don't know. We're going to find out. When we read the note, it was a little startling because it sort of implied that maybe some of the numbers were wrong. And so Cassie's can go back and see if we can find what was the difference between the 2 sets of data. So we're going to be doing a little QC on that, but we don't know. But what we're told right now is all the data is right. So we've had a hiccup over the last 24 hours that we've had it going up and down and all kind of crazy things, but we believe now we're not going to have any more of that.
That's an Esri issue, I assume.
It was from Esri. It could be census data.
There was Esri told us that there was an issue with the census tracts, some of them. They said it was a very small amount, and so there's a good chance it won't affect any of our maps that we've already drawn. But as of 1 o'clock today, they've updated the data, and so we're gonna go through and change all of the maps, but
Do we know if that was just here in Utah or was it
It sounded like
nationwide?
it was more national.
yeah, because it came from the spokesperson of
Yeah,
Esri.
it came, yeah, it hit a bunch of states. So they're doing the states in batches, and we were in one of the earlier batches. And so that whole batch apparently had something.
Guinea pigs.
But today, that is, like you said, 1 o'clock, we believe. And we believed that yesterday, but we believe everything is fine and good, and you're only getting good data. So that's what we believe. So I think we're good with Esri. We did get our 5 licenses up and running, which is really helpful for communities of interest. We've received over 200 maps from Better Boundaries. So we're going to be bringing that to you as part of that community of interest. so you can start seeing those kinds of things. I think what's ideal, what you're doing is that you're producing these maps. And again, the deviations are off, but we know we're going to keep refining them. And when you go to these public hearings, people are going to be talking to you and you're going to get better information. And that's going to give you some idea of where you're going to want to pull the numbers to refine. If you refined it now, you'd have to change it and refine it again. So I think there's value in leaving a few rough edges. And like you said, we have 2 months to do it. I think having Professor Persley here has done that will give us some good insights in better practices and how we can be efficient and what are good ways to go about this. So I think there's some value in him coming early in this process now that you've had a week of doing this. So anyway, I'm excited about that. So he'll be here Monday. Monday and Tuesday. So what we'll do is we'll have him go in with different groups, talk to you, tell you what he's thinking. We'll be with him as staff, hearing what he has to say. We'll be meeting. Anyway, so that's that story. Anything else you'd like to tell us that we should be doing that would help you, or?
I like the help in terms of, as we're making decisions, that there's somebody who's looking at the maps and seeing what we're doing and saying, well, this is an option or that's an option. Not telling us what to do, but telling us what possible solutions might be to the problem we're having of trying to get 300 people from here over to here. So I appreciate the staff.
Thank
The interns,
Good job, guys.
the volunteers.
I don't like them to hear compliments, gives them big heads, so we pretty much just eat on it. If they're interns, they don't have to be nice. Oh. I wanted to also mention to you that we are working with a number of media outlets for Monticello and Heber, and we're starting to look ahead to our next set of meetings. So we'll talk to you a little bit about that, but those are going out in terms of talking to the radio folks and newspapers and local stuff. And we'll be talking to their elected cities and other folks to try to get them to these meetings as well. I wanted to talk just briefly about maps. So we've started the review of the first batch of congressional maps. We're not putting them on our website until the commission says they go on the website. So what we want to do is make sure we understand the process that whereby you have approved maps. So what we're thinking is in the public hearings, particularly for the first 4 or 5 or 6 of those, I think these congressional maps are getting to a place, we can put up 5 or 6 or 8 congressional maps and say we want public comment on these. For the other maps, we can show the existing ones and get comments on those. But as we get further in the process and have completed school district and house maps and Senate maps, we'll replace the existing ones with those so that we can get comments directly on those. But I don't think staff doesn't want to publish any maps that the commission said. So what we're looking at is the commission to take a look at your maps, all of them, and then think about, do we want to show about 13 maps, or is it better to kind of refine it to 7 that are representative of what we're looking at? And as we bring new maps online, we'll have reports on each of those, but we'll want to meet and convene and have the commission. So while you're in a team working on a map, it's your map. But once it belongs to the commission, then the commission will direct how that map changes. So as we get public comment, we're not just doing it. It's just not that team, but it's the whole commission either agreeing to those comments or directing a team to fix or address those comments, or I just want to make sure we're following a protocol and we're not changing maps. We're going to go very quickly, but I want to do it in still some kind of an ordered way that we know map 23 is going to be changed, who gets to change it, and bring those back to accept those changes once we start getting closer to the 12 official maps, so that it's not a team doing it, but it's the commission doing it and not staff doing it. But we have a meeting coming up on Friday. A week from today. I'd like to show off some of your maps and just again say, these are drafts. Let's start getting comments, and I'm here to take some input on how you guys want to, how the commission wants to go about that.
Gordon, you're having all four, Congressional, Senate, House, and School Board for our meeting on a week from tonight.
No, I think what we'll have, I think we have some really great congressional maps. So I'm thinking, no matter what, we ought to show some of those. I don't believe, it depends how many hours, and you're working like insane hours, so we could have other maps ready. But we may end up having some school district maps that we can show. But I need the commission to say, these are maps that are ready for prime time to start showing to the public. I don't want us staff pushing out anything that you're not ready to have people see. And I don't want people, I want to make sure we've done a quick sanity check so that we know offhand if somebody's complaining, we say, yeah, we know it's too many, we're going to refine it, but we want to know this concept. Does this look right for the school district or the Senate, or the House?
Please, Karen, and then Lyle.
Yeah, I think if possible, as we travel out, even to our first stop in Monticello, to me, I think it would be really worthwhile if we had at least the congressional, the state school board, and some Senate maps to throw out there. The House, maybe we don't have time to really do that, but we have, such a great staff, and if they could help look at the maps we are producing and make sure there aren't any glaring errors, that we haven't, totally gone out of the boundaries from the criteria we've adopted and the standards we've adopted. And maybe, I don't know, maybe if each of the groups, choose their top 2 or 3 maps or something, and we make sure that they pass muster. But I'm thinking if we really could have at least those 3 types of maps, how many of each, I don't know, but to present to Monticello, because we want to start getting feedback. We want to really get some good public feedback on those maps. Are we going the right direction? Are there, big things that we should be doing or should not be doing? So anyway, my suggestion would be, if at all possible, to start with this.
And if we get a good congressional map, we can put it out there. I'm not trying to say you can't get it there. I just know how much work it is to do a congressional map. It's pretty painful. And we like a multiple of them, so not just one, but
Wow.
I'd have just to Gordon, it'd be very helpful to me if on each of these maps, if I could see how it affected Weber, Davis, Salt Lake, and Utah County. I can figure out where Box Elder is. I can figure out where Washington is, San Juan. I don't really particularly need that, but for me to make a judgment, I need to see how is Salt Lake divided? How is Weber divided? How is Davis? How is Utah? Those are the 4 counties that are all going to be probably cut in some way or divided up. I think that's going to be a
So on one of these, to just put a county
The county
overlay.
lines.
Line.
yeah.
That would
You probably ought to have it in some on the side so you can see it. That would be helpful to me.
I think that would be
I like that. That's good. We can do that.
Do you want paper format or do you want something digital that you can interact with?
Both.
Okay, just checking.
I need my 5-year-old granddaughter.
So what do you think? What I'm hearing you is on these maps that if we give out these to us, put the county lines on them and maybe have a blow up of Salt Lake, Utah, count. Those are going to be the ones that are going to be.
Maybe a second page. So
Yeah.
you look at it, you
So you
see
can see where the city
where you're
lines are.
drawing lines.
What do we have in terms of a big screen or a digital screen? Are we gonna have something like that at the hearings so that we can have it up on the wall for everyone present to see, and maybe have one of our interns
Most of our
driving the
venues
map
will have a
around?
large screen. I was talking to Chair about this a little bit. What we intend to do is have maps up. And so the way the hearing will go, what we're planning to do, so weigh on that, is that as the hearing goes forward, we'll just talk about congressional maps. So if you have something on the school district, you're going to wait. So we can have the congressional map up, stay focused on it, and we can zoom into places where people are talking. I think that will help move the discussion along, because if they spend the time describing the line, if we can just show it, then they're just describing the reason for it. Now, if there's not a venue, we'll bring computers and we'll try to make that go pretty
So
well.
we will have a live map, even if it's Google Maps up on the screen somewhere,
Have fewer.
somewhere in the room.
We'll have our Esri up so we can do stuff. And then we'll go on to the school district and the Senate, each one in that order. We're gonna look at, the staff will go ahead of the time for the venues to make sure what we have and don't have. We're a little bit suspect of some of the smaller venues, but we'll try to make sure everything, we have all those things.
Have security there.
So, yeah.
That's Rob Bishop.
You do what I tell you to do, it's okay.
We will talk to him about that.
So one of the questions that I have for all of you then is, how do we want to decide what maps we're going to show?
I think maybe more maps than less, even if it's only this size, so that they can see there's lots of different ideas that are happening out there. And it's not predetermined, here's what the recommendation is gonna be, but that we've looked at all these permutations. And is there one that strikes you as something outrageous? Or is there one that says, I like these two or three, that's in the realm of possibility?
So part of what I'm hearing then is, as long as the team has completed a map and we've gone through the set of
Make
checks, then we're comfortable with putting it out there.
And number them so people can say, I like number 13 and I think 4 is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think this packet that Cassidy's given us would be ideal if we had the county boundaries and
County overlay
so
on
forth
top of it.
and put a little more makeup on it. It'll be good.
Rob?
No, I said something different to you earlier. I like this, put them all up.
Yeah, I do too.
I think it makes a lot more sense. Could you also have the existing map,
Oh, yeah.
the existing boundaries?
We can
2010
show all
map
the
for all of
existing
these
ones.
there, so they can compare that to this.
And with the number, if we're gonna be in, for example, Monticello, what the population changes in that area, and that you're gonna have to grow that district from last time by 10,000 people or shrink it by 5,000 or whatever. So every location can see our surrounding districts that we've had, that we've gotten used to. Here's what the population changes are gonna do. We may not show you the whole state,
Yeah.
but the area around where our hearing is, here's what this is gonna do to you.
I think that's really important, of being able to tailor our initial message at those hearings with what, just specifically on that region, that area where we are. That's really important. So.
And I think that, really ought to be part of the initial conversation that we have as we introduce, the commission and our criteria. Talk about the real lay of the land and how the shifts in population affect the process and what we're doing.
I would hope Love Communications can give us the information of the kind of presentations that we need to make. So we all speak with one voice.
So we're putting together a presentation that we'll start in Monticello, and if it works well, we'll keep moving, but we may have to modify as we go through. But yes, we want to have that. And we are right now thinking in our presentation, we'll actually have like the mayor or council person or committee commissioner talk about their community as the first speaker for why they like it there. So that will be part of our initial build into it. Now we're thinking of initially having a open house. So an hour before the meeting starts, we'll have staff, computers, all these maps on different foam core handouts. So people can be educated so that they're not asking you to change city limit lines or something, but they understand what you're supposed to be dealing with and what the real issues are that you have to manage. So after that, then we'll go into a meeting, have a presentation, introduce the commission, and then we'll start the process. So we'll see how that goes. I'm excited. And
If you're gonna have the open house, I think it's gonna be really important to have those numbers available, what it's gonna do to the locale. So as people see the original maps for the first time, they understand this county
changing this way.
has to change this way. It's not just the commission wants to change you. The law requires that this is gonna have to happen. Question is, how is it gonna look when we're done?
So what we did is Autumn made maps on a page which shows just the area around Heber or just the Monticello, Moab area, and shows what the existing boundaries are like. And so that's on one side of the piece of paper. The other page side is the comment form where they put their name so they can physically draw a line on the particular boundary they're looking at and then just write why they think that's important. So they don't have to describe a line, they can draw a line. So that will be the actual piece of paper they hand in for the public that we'll invite them up to talk to. So that'll be part of our process. So once you write it out, it helps formulate the words to get it into a little more concise.
Please. I'd suggest one other thing, Gordon, that at places where you expect larger crowds, to have 2 or 3 different groups doing the same thing. In other words, you don't want one person, one map up there trying to explain to 400 people what it is. It's much better if you had 4 different groups with 100 each or whatever group, so that you can have more interaction and people are interacting rather than just listening.
Yeah, well, and I think what's really good, I don't think we did it on purpose, but we have some of our smaller venues to begin with, and we hit some of our larger venues in October. So we'll be experimenting and trying to manage this, and we'll be able to grow into a better process, I think. And so we'll have the same roundtable. What did you not like about that last meeting? What you did like about it? So I'm thinking what I'm hearing too is you are all working on school district, congressional, and Senate maps now, or House and Senate, the state maps. And so as you get those done, we'll do a quick analysis, and anything we can get wrapped up by Thursday, we'll try to put into a map with the different county and city limits that we can show people, knowing that there's more to come, because it's going to take you another week to really, I think, hit your stride with those other maps, just because of the size and difficulty of those districts. Okay, you might shock me and do really well first, so I'm not trying to be critical, but those just take more.
Yeah, I mean, it would also be nice for the group that created that map to be able to go back in a week and say, here are the city lines now over the top of it. Here are the places we could adjust to try and accommodate those. And maybe as we were beginning, we didn't see or didn't think about.
Yeah, and I think some of your staff will be able to help. They're going to suggest maybe some trade-offs, but I think I love you hearing some public comments in these different places in the state. I think that's going to help you reflect on maybe where you're okay chopping something out of a city or leaving something whole. And I think when we talk to the clerks and the school district, that's all going to play into it to help. So I think that's all I wanted to. So we're going to spend the night in Moab. We have the La Quinta. And so we're planning staff has a car. We're going to be taking down all of our gear and the tents and the computers and things. We'll set up outside the venue earlier in the day. And then the commission, we can rent a car, you can carpool, whatever you'd like. We just would like you there. We're not over. What's that? Yes, mostly sober. We have I'm not trying to be too restrictive, but all those are a good thing. So carpooling's great. If you want, we can rent a car. We can, but the venue we're going to be going all the way to Monticello. It starts, the open house will be kind of live at 6. The actual meeting won't start till 7. You're more than welcome to come and meet people and talk at 6, and then we'll pull you in, have the presentation. After the presentation, we wrap up things. Moab's only about a 45 minute drive. I think it's maybe an hour, I don't know. Anyway, that's where you'll spend the night. And then the next day, it's Heber. Yeah, and then we drive to Heber for the next meeting. That's about a 3.5 hour drive. And I believe our open house starts at 11. And then our public hearing starts at 12. So you just need to time accordingly. It's about a 3.5 hour drive from Moab to Heber. So again, carpooling's great. Staff's great, all those things are great.
Talking too much. I'll be driving down, I'm sure, with my wife Alice in our Sienna van. So if anybody wants to ride with us, we'd be more than happy to pick them up and take them down up to Moab and there. So I'll make that offer, let me know. The other thing I'd say is it might be well to have us meet for dinner someplace in Blanding, if there's a place to eat in Blanding at, let's say 4:30 or 5 o'clock, so we know we're all there and together.
We'll put that on the itinerary and email that out to everybody.
I can't think of any other that we'd need to worry about.
If you know where the good eating places are as we travel the state, don't be afraid to email us and we'll try to maybe.
Outside of Monticello, it was Ruby's,
That's a Salt Lake.
and it was fabulous. That's been a long time.
Where was that? Bill?
Ruby's outside of Monticello.
That's helpful. I don't know Monticello well.
But that was 20 years ago, so.
We'll look at that and let's schedule a spot. All right.
And then if you do want to carpool, Ally sent out an email, and so make sure you respond to her, and then, we can facilitate with Lyle. I can also drive the Highlander, so we can make it work.
I can take one or two people as well.
Okay. I want to carpool, but weren't you saying it was cheaper for the state
To use a state vehicle?
instead of reimbursed mileage?
Yeah.
If you rent it, we want you there happy and well, and we got enough covered either way. So carpool, pay you some miles, or rent a car, we'll get you a car. Got it both ways.
They're using a state car to carpool.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll have a look at the numbers. Is it cheaper to rent a car? It's cheaper to rent a car than pay for all you guys to come. But I want you there more than I care about the dollars for the two. The amount's gonna cost.
Any other items from staff?
Yeah, if you want to, let us know. Just the way the insurance works is better if we don't get in a wreck though, but either way. I'm letting you guys make those
I've
decisions.
seen Lionel drive through Manaway.
That's why you see me, I drive so slowly.
He knows where the traps are. He gets it. If there's anything else you'd like to, we've heard a lot of great ideas from the commission about working with the school district, clerks and stuff. So as we grow, we want to get as many people's eyes on these maps that will help us make them better. And so, anyway.
Okay, any other items from members of the commission? We're not hearing any. I believe that we have some public comment.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Hi, my name is Malcolm Reed, and I'm interested in this topic, I guess, because I moved here, moved into Utah, Mill Creek 3 years ago. And what I've seen is Mill Creek is sort of the poster child for gerrymandering in the state. And I'd just like to encourage you to keep the word independent top of mind in the work that you're doing here. I would guess, and I've heard a lot about what the legislature will let you do today, and that to me is a cause of great concern. Because I think left to their own devices, the legislature is just going to do what they did 10 years ago. And we're going to be left with some districts that can't walk, can't talk, and are really not reflective of the public will. The independent commission was really set up by the voice of the voters, and I appreciate that you keep independent top of mind. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn,
And then we go back to mapping.
and then we can go back to mapping.
Till 7 o'clock.
11, did you say?
2 hours drive down to 8 to 9 is enough for me.
You guys seem to be enjoying this, and that makes it so much better for our staff and everybody. So I just wanted to say I appreciate that, because I like to be mean to them, and so that you're nice to them, it just is very pleasant. for me to do it that way.
You want us to change, has to always remind me.
No, don't change. Let me be the honored one, you guys be the good ones, so. Yeah.
Did you say that in changing over from what we were doing, that some of the numbers changed on these?
I think on that map, it looked like it maybe one block. So the two districts we had at 40 or at 1 and -1 are now at 41 and -41. So a block, maybe 2 seem to have shifted over. So we're gonna try to figure out which ones if we can.
We were 3-3.
I believe you, yeah, so now that we have Esri up and running for real, we'll just stay in Esri, right? We're not gonna go back to engage Esri, we'll look at that.
There was something that was
I
funny.
think we've adjourned, so.
Yep.
And you can end the broadcast.
Back in.